You might have gathered from my previous video that I enjoy movies just as much as I enjoy video games. Of course, video games remain my preferred of the two, but to put it quite simply, I'm just a fan of good stories. I play many video games, I watch plenty of movies, and I read some books. I like stories. Oftentimes I'll come across one bit of media that I think would fit perfectly well in a different medium. Like, and I apologize in advance, Expedition 33 being a movie. Of the few books I've read, there were few where I couldn't see them becoming a movie or even a game. Hollywood loves adapting anything into movies. Actually, correction, Hollywood loves adapting anything into live action movies. I mean, one look at what Disney's doing, turning all their beloved IPs into curated slop. Like, what is this? Disney honestly has no business recreating movies like Moana and Frozen into live action since these films were already relatively recent. These movies very seldom reach the quality of the original, which is a shame because of what the originals represent, the golden ages of Disney. These live action remakes should feel like a celebration of Disney's filmography, a remembrance of their past. But instead, these adaptations feel like cash grabs, for lack of a better term. Even in the early days of Disney, the studio often grabbed pre-existing stories and adapted them for the big screen. Think Pinocchio, The Little Mermaid, even Mulan. All are pre-existing stories that Disney took, reworked, and put on the big screen. The difference between this practice and what Disney is doing now is how creative and reimagined these stories were. The animated Mulan, one of my favorite Disney animated movies, reimagined the Chinese tale of a woman joining the ranks of the Chinese military. It did so in a unique way, characterizing Mulan in ways the original tale did not to mention the musical numbers. The live-action Mulan, however, deprives the titular character of any characterization, opting for a version of Mulan that may have been believable to the Chinese centuries ago, but not one that we as a modern-day audience can really relate to. The lack of musical numbers, which made the original movie so memorable, contributes to the overall lack of quality shown in this abominable mess of a movie. I've had more of my fair share of disappointments when it comes to adaptations. I think we all do. It's like a canon event, I guess. Mine comes in the form of two pieces of media, Ender's Game and Uncharted. Ender's Game was the first instance where I read the book before I watched the movie, and as expected, I was disappointed. It didn't capture the magic that I felt reading the book. I can't really explain it past that. I had a deeper bout of resentment in regards to the Uncharted movie. I've just finished Uncharted 3 in the Nathan Drake collection when the movie trailer came out. I was excited, though cautious when I saw Tom Holland would be playing Nathan Drake. Ultimately, I watched it, because, of course I would. And I came out feeling disappointed. Very easily this could have been its own IP and it would have arguably been better. But because they just had to slap Uncharted in the name, there were great expectations. Don't even get me started on that Nolan North cameo and that Uncharted motif that shamelessly played only once. That's not to say every IP I previously enjoyed in one medium got inherently worse in movie form. The Super Mario movie is an example of an adaptation I enjoyed, but it wasn't like any Mario game that we knew up until that point. I'd make the claim that this actually contributes to its quality. Was it a flawed movie? Yes, it's Illumination. But was it enjoyable? Yes, again, it's Illumination. Its unique story coupled with beautiful animation created an interesting series of events that unfolded in a goofy and fun way. Chris Pratt's Mario is still inexcusable. Another adaptation that worked really well in my opinion, as you probably know at this point, was the Sonic the Hedgehog movies. These movies were a real treat to watch, especially the way I watched them, which all three movies in the span of 3 days. Again, these movies were different from the games, despite the second Sonic movie being based on Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and the third movie being based off Sonic Adventure 2. They still executed the storylines in their own unique ways. The movies are different enough from their source material to warrant interest from the existing fanbase, though of course, not everyone will be on board. Though as a new-found Sonic fan, it's nice to get an adaptation of anything Sonic related. Movie, game, TV show, it's just a treat to have Sonic. These movies were excellent adaptations after the Sonic redesign, and opened the door for so many people to realize they actually have autism. Imagine. It's common for video games to get movie adaptations, but it also used to be common for movies to get a video game adaptation. I don't really know why this is, but back in the day, namely the early 2000s and 2010s, there used to be movie tie-in games. Think The Matrix, Wreck-It Ralph, really any LEGO game you could possibly think of. These things were everywhere. And sure, none of them were good enough to warrant Game of the Year, aside from the fact that there was no Game of the Year as we currently know it, but they offer some sense of fun. I remember playing the Amazing Spider-Man tie-in games as a kid and being absolutely terrified of Carnage in the second game. Less common, I'd like to argue, are games based on books. Really, the only example I can think of for this is the Witcher franchise, but since I've played so little of the Wild Hunt and haven't read any of the books, I don't feel qualified to talk about it. Still, it's an interesting thing that I decided to bring up. Movies to books used to be common. What comes to mind are the novelized versions of movies like Revenge of the Sith, which adds more details to the thoughts and intentions of individual characters. It's a neat idea, but exists for few reasons other to add what movies couldn't. It exists for a niche audience, which is fine and all, but niche doesn't make the big bucks. That's why movie studios typically try to stick with things that are tried and true. Harry Potter was a successful enough franchise that warranted an entire movie series. Lord of the Rings, though a gamble, had a dedicated enough fan base to warrant not just 3 movies, but 3 movies that added up to nearly 11 hours in runtime. But risks aren't always worth taking. Want a Marvel Cinematic Universe film featuring Squirrel Girl as the main character? We might get that, but for the foreseeable future, Squirrel Girl just isn't really well known outside Marvel rivals and a few comic spheres. In fact, when Sony was given the opportunity to buy the rights of almost every single Marvel IP under the sun, they opted to stick with the tried and true character of Spider-Man, thinking no one else cared for characters like Iron Man. They, of course, would be proven wrong a little bit later, but that's besides the point. Another exception to the risk equals bad debacle is Dune, an exceptional movie franchise shaping up to be just as big as Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's things like this that make it difficult to find an original IP in Hollywood nowadays that isn't immediately banished to a streaming service like K-pop Demon Hunters, and it's also why, regrettably, movies like the future Elden Ring probably won't do so well, though I honestly hope they will. The Tarnished, though iconic for their one recognizable trait of being maidenless, isn't a household name much like Mario or Sonic. The Last of Us, which could have worked as a movie on its own, also wasn't as recognizable. Halo, The Witcher, the future God of War, and even more have been relegated to streaming services over fears of not being adequate enough for the big screen, or that there's just simply too much to cram into a 2 or 3 hour long movie. That's why Expedition 33 might not work in movie form, to my personal dismay. And that's why, from what I've experienced so far, Red Dead Redemption 2 would be a hard game to adapt. But there's another thing I want to talk about: understanding the source material. Oftentimes, especially with video games to movies, those making the movie have little understanding of the source material. Examples of this include The Witcher, Halo, and the upcoming God of War TV series. It's frustrating when someone comes along and tries to adapt something you absolutely adore, only for them to admit they don't care about the thing enough to experience its original form. Semi-Ramblomatic on YouTube put it very simply.
Surely not understanding video games would disqualify someone from the job of adapting a video game, in the way you wouldn't hire someone who doesn't speak Japanese to translate a Japanese text. It's the dismissive attitude that irks me. Why do we assume knowing how to make a film qualifies someone to barge onto video game turf like they know what they're doing? Imagine if it was the other way around. Imagine if someone had been hired to make a video game adaptation of, say, Weekend at Bernie's, admitted to the press that they hadn't seen the film and had no plans to, but can't imagine it being that important.
I bring up video game adaptations since I'm passionate about this medium being represented accurately, but this issue transcends video games. Think back to the live-action Snow White movie. Famously, Rachel Zegler hated the classic Disney film. You know, the one film that allowed Disney to transcend the visual medium of films by utilizing a specific medium typically relegated to short films, you know, the film that made Disney a household name, it becomes frustrating watching what you love being stripped of everything that made it unique. Why can't directors spend time with the source material? Why don't they sit through hours and hours of content, sift through hundreds and hundreds of pages, watch their own freaking films? Why don't they? Just as I was losing hope for modern Hollywood when it comes to good adaptations, I watched Project Hail Mary last week. It was amazing, awe-inspiring. It was absolute cinema. And yes, I'm using the Kojima version because even the legend Hideo Kojima himself enjoyed the film. Project Hail Mary manages to be a goofy film with Ryan Gosling exuding his typical charm, but it simultaneously manages to be a respectful, serious, emotional film. It brings the world and the universe to life in ways a book simply cannot do on its own, no matter how good that book may be. Like I said, this film is goofy when it wants to be, but it hits those emotional beats from the book when it needs to. It knows how to balance goofiness with pure emotion, unlike whatever Disney is doing. Sorry, I'll try my best not to bring up Disney again. I cannot express my love for this movie. Not only has it reminded me of one of my favorite movies, Interstellar, it reminded me of my favorite game, Outer Wilds. Alone in space, drifting endlessly, exploring worlds, gorgeous visuals, inspiring music, mysteries to solve, people to save. And though drifting alone in space, you feel like you're a part of something bigger, something grander. And at a certain point, you don't feel alone anymore. This is the closest we'll get to an Outer Wilds movie, and I'm fine with that. After all, it's not a game that should get its own movie. Sure, there were things in the Project Hail Mary film that were omitted from the book, like the world nuking Antarctica, more of Grace on his journey of self-discovery, and more things of the such. Despite all this, the film goes into great effort to accurately portray the characters of Grace and Rocky, but it does so simultaneously in line with yet distinct from the book, which leads me to a fact I'm not proud of. I haven't read the book. After watching the movie, I asked my sister for the book in her Audible account, so I have access to it, but have yet to listen to it. I fully intend to over the course of the next few weeks, but as of right now, I haven't read it. Still, the movie was so spectacular that it instilled feelings I haven't felt watching many other movies. Naturally, the next course of action is to explore the original source material. Adaptations can go one of two ways. They can be shameless cash grabs like Disney, or they can be works of art worthy of deeper appreciation, like something like, say, Harry Potter. I'd argue that Project Hail Mary exists in a third dominion, one that actively makes an individual yearn for even more. And thankfully more exists in the form of the book. I wouldn't necessarily say I regret watching Project Hail Mary before reading it, though my experience with the book will be tainted because of my watching the movie first. I'll still find enjoyment out of it. I understand books are different from movies. There will be plenty of things that were omitted from theatrical releases, but there will also be plenty of things that didn't originally exist in the book. I'd argue that a good adaptation doesn't only understand and respect the source material, but it also adapts in its own way in accordance with the new medium, such that it's the same world, same characters, same story, but ultimately somewhat its own thing, all while still respecting the source material. Of course, this might not work like Uncharted, but it's proven to work in other movies like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and even How to Train Your Dragon. I guess what I'm trying to say is that a good adaptation makes me want to delve into the source material to see what the original creator envisioned. I'm a writer. I write books, though very slowly. I've been doing it for nearly 10 years now. And though I started out dreaming of what these stories of mine would look like in movie form, I've later come to realize that there are ways my stories will work well in book form, and there are ways that they will work well in movie form. Heck, for one story, it'll work great in game form. Still, the form they ultimately work best in is how I originally create them. If I make a script, they'll work well for a movie. But if I make a book it shall be. And though I would like to see my books get adapted for the big screen, I hope that whoever will carry out that undertaking has a simple trait: understanding. I hope they understand what I created, and I hope they respect it. And I hope that whoever watches those movies, if ever they were to exist, would want to read my original vision, much like how Andy Weir hopes those who enjoy Project Hail Mary in movie form will enjoy Project Hail Mary in book form. And that's why I'm starting now. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.
Chapter 1. What's 2 plus 2? Something about the question irritates me. I'm tired.